Hi, thank you for joining me in the Louie file today. I'm continuing in my study in the little first letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. It's called First Timothy. We're in chapter 5. We're going to talk a little bit about widows today and what the role of the church is pertaining to widows according to First Timothy. All right, we're going to start around verse 3. So we're going to read First Timothy 5 starting in verse 3, and I'm probably just going to read through 16 if you'll bear with me, and then we'll come back and see what we can find out. So 1 Timothy 5 verse 3, honor widows who are widows indeed. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. Now she who is a widow indeed and who has been left alone has fixed her hope on God, and continues in entreaties and prayers night and day. But she who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. Prescribe these things as well, so that they may be above reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. A widow is to be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, having been the wife of one man, having a reputation for good works, and if she's brought up children, if she has shown hospitality to strangers, if she's washed the saints' feet, if she has assisted those in distress, and if she has devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to put younger widows on the list, for when they feel sensual desires in disregard of Christ, they want to get married, thus incurring condemnation because they have set aside their previous pledge. At the same time, they also learn to be idle as they go around from house to house, and not merely idle, but also gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Therefore, I want younger widows to get married, bear children, keep house, and give the enemy no occasion for reproach. For some have already turned aside to follow Satan. If any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. Isn't that something? You know, many people have no idea that the Bible even addresses this subject, especially not in such great detail. So Paul is instructing Timothy, this young pastor, because he's a young pastor. He doesn't really know how to deal with certain situations that might come up. So the Apostle Paul is telling him, first of all, if the church is going to take care of widows, they have to be widows indeed, the way this is worded. In other words, they have to really be a widow. They really have to be somebody that is in need of help, because they don't have, well, obviously they don't have a husband, but they don't have children, they don't have grandchildren, they don't have any support system at all. So if you do have children or grandchildren, it's their job to take care of the widow. That makes perfect sense, kind of practical speech. The church just can't take care of every single person all the time. The funds are really need to be delegated in a manner that makes more sense than that. Now, if she's left alone, now he also even says that her hope is in God, and she continues in prayer day and night. Wow. But not one who gives herself to wanton pleasure. In other words, not a flesh-living person. You're a widow, let's say, and it even says you can't be under 60 is the requirement Paul gives Timothy here. So if you're 60 years old and you have some grandkids that are rebellious and don't listen and don't come around, and you yourself are given to a fleshy lifestyle, but you come to church and you say, well, you're supposed to take care of widows. The church, according to this right here, has a right to say, but you're not, you're not even living for the kingdom. You're not walking by faith. You're not living in the Spirit. You're not attending church. You're not praying for the people. You're not caring for anyone else. You're just wanting us to provide money and provision for your fleshy lifestyle. That can't work. Now, but Louie, well, we can't make those judgments. You're judging them. I'm not judging them. I'm just telling you what the book says. You know, as far as a church goes, there's no shortage of people needing or wanting help. Some of those people need help because of very poor decisions that they've made in their life. Maybe a lifestyle of poor decisions, drugs, alcohol, selfishness, worldliness, just never-ending need for more stuff, more things. No real desire to be of benefit and help to someone else. They're just a big vacuum cleaner sucking up whatever they can get. People sometimes, they even go from church to church to church to do this, because one will finally get worn out on the neediness and the constant begging, and then finally they'll cut them off and they'll say, we can't give you anymore. So then you find out a little bit later they're at the church down the road, and they just go on and on like this, and they prey upon people in the church that are kind, loving, generous people by and large, and they know this, and it works on some kind of weird guilt trip that you're supposed to care for me, you're supposed to take care of me, I'm in need. So Paul gives him very clear, distinct criteria here. As he's saying in verse 6 here, if you're giving yourself to pleasure, flesh, you're dead even while you live. He says you're dead even while she's dead, even while she's living. Wow. So you're just going to be pouring funds or care and money into the world to a dead end. Then it goes on in verse 8, it says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, he kind of looks now toward the children and grandchildren possibly here, and if they're not caring for their own widows, their own grandmother or mother, then it says then they've denied the faith and they're worse than an unbeliever. That's pretty harsh, but it's true, isn't it? Because even people that don't believe in God care for their own family. I mean, that may be the highest thing they've got in their life if they don't have Christ in their life, but they at least provide for their mom or their grandmother. So the church shouldn't be overly burdened. Now, I'm a church member, and I have a mother that possibly one day could be a widow. It's not my job to send her to the church if I'm able to go and work and have money and provide for her. That should be common sense. So it really hits both sides of the equation here. The widow herself can't be fleshy and worldly, and the widow's children or grandchildren can't be selfish and unconcerned and expect the church to tie up all these loose ends. Then he says in verse 9, the widow's to be put on the list only at 60 years old. And then he says, having been the wife of one man, a reputation for good works, brought up children, shown hospitality to strangers, washed the saints' feet. She's assisted those in distress and devoted herself to every good work. So we're talking about a very specific person here that has been engaged in kingdom work. That's a Christian woman, that is a caring, praying, giving, generous, hospitable woman. Not just anybody, right? And then it says, but refuse to put the younger ones on the list. And this should be obvious too. Being younger, you're going to have more of a pull and desire toward a male, toward a man in your life, which is not wrong. So you get married, and then the church doesn't need to take care of you. And then the new husband takes care of you. But this is kind of implying that she has sensual desires and she disregards marriage. So it's another fleshy lifestyle that we're talking about here. Younger women wanting just to have somebody care for them while they engage in whatever kind of fleshly behavior they think they want to. And then it goes on and it tells they've set aside their previous pledge, in other words, to stay pure until marriage. Verse 13, at the same time, they also learn to be idle, and they go around, and they're not only idle, but they're gossips and busybodies. They get involved in all kinds of stuff they shouldn't be involved in. You don't want to be giving and caring for that. You don't want to provide opportunity for that. Instead of being idle, they need to find a way to take care of themselves or get some method of payment in their life, or food, or however that works, and the church doesn't need to be funding that. Therefore, he tells us there, he says, therefore they should get married, have children, keep house. I mean, then he has a very harsh word here, verse 15. For some have already turned aside to follow Satan. Wow, that's pretty straightforward. They've gone over to the dark side. So if any woman who is a believer has a dependent widow, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened. So it may assist the widows that are really in need. So this should just be common sense. You know, when you have family members that are in need, then the family members take care of them. If there are no family members, then that is part of what the church is there for. You know, throughout the Bible, God puts a lot of emphasis on widows and how He wants to provide, and He's going to punish people that mistreat or use them and abuse them. I was going to share a couple of verses with you. One in the Old Testament here, Psalm 68. Psalm 68, verse 5. It says, "A father of the fatherless and a judge for the widows is God in His holy habitation." So God takes it seriously how we treat and care for those who are widows. And then, an amazing verse in James 1, verse 27. It says, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained or unspotted by the world." Wow, so James defines for us what God says is the right kind of religion, and it's caring for widows and orphans and keeping yourself unspotted from the world. Those three things, that's what God is after. So we are called as the church, as the body of Christ, to be a father to the fatherless and a husband to the husbandless, if you will. And that's what part of a major factor of what the church is here for, is to help those that cannot at all help themselves. So, with that being said, I think we're going to end here, and I thank you for your time, and I would ask you to tune in next time. We're going to move on into the last half of 1 Timothy 5, where he starts addressing elders and how that looks and how that works in the church setting. So I hope you'll join me then. I'll see you next time on the Louie File.